So we talk about a lot of shoes in here because shoes are designed theoretically with different purposes. But some of the stuff, especially with squatting, I want to kind of use that as the framework for this discussion, and maybe some agility-based stuff.
Sure.
Right? Because I think there's a misconception in regards to how the shoes influence things. If you look at the shoe research, it doesn't really change what the foot does. Which, when you think about it, it's pretty powerful to think that we're not really changing feet when we put people in shoes or orthotics or things like that. But what we are changing is the response of the entire system above the shoe, because the shoe becomes the ground, and then it provides a sensory input that changes the mechanics from above.
Gotcha.
A lot of perspective in regards to some of the shoes that we're going to look at has always been, oh, you have an ankle mobility problem, when the reality is they don't really have an ankle mobility problem. They have a system that is either too inhaled or too exhaled, and therefore they don't have the variability, and so then this is demonstrated in a loss of movement options. So we'll see changes in hips, we'll see changes in shoulders, we'll see changes in the ability to bend or squat or whatever. And so we've got a pretty good array of shoes here that'll give us a really nice representation of different states of the system versus just saying, we're going to put your ankle in a certain position to substitute for, again, the structural reductionist concept of you have this isolated problem, and it's pretty rare that you have an isolated problem.
For sure.
Right? Now, having said that, certain cultures that are based on it utilizing a squat as part of their lifestyle from birth to whenever. So some of the cultures that rely on that, they do have bony adaptations. So they actually have what's called a squat facet on the distal tibia. They will have a deeper neck on the talus that allows the tibia greater excursion. Yeah. Right, but that's something that's developed literally from the time from birth, and again, because they continue to use the squat pattern, they develop these things to allow them to achieve this. So that's a cheat when you think about it. It's a bony adaptation that allows them to cheat into a squat.
Sure. And
so then people say, well, they're such good squatters, but without that bony adaptation, not so much. And then the time that I did spend in China, and I probably watched a good 100 people like squat because I told them that they were cheating. And so right away I have this big long line of people that come up and they want me to evaluate their squat to see if they're cheating. And the truth is that they cheat a lot. Right? They make adaptations at their foot, or they'll change knee positions and so on up the chain. Just take your pick. But
sure.
but let's look at this from the perspective of an inhalation strategy versus an exhalation strategy, and where these shoes might actually come into play and where they are useful. Because each of these shoes, except for maybe one in this whole array, is something that we could probably apply usefully under the right circumstances.
Okay.
And so we do have a bit of extreme here. But the thing that I want to show you, so the heels elevated thing has become a big deal. And I don't know. I don't think we started it. I don't know if anybody starts anything. But point being, it's like that's why you start to see these things. So you start to see this little doodad in the gym all the time. So these are just the incline boards that allow people to squat deeper.
Yep.
And so again, this is the sort of structural reductionist strategy. It's like, oh, you don't have ankle mobility, so we're going to give you a substitution for your ankle mobility, and we'll just put you on an incline. But the reality is, I have to change the whole system. If I'm changing the contact with the ground, everything above will change. So what that incline board does is it moves people towards an inhalation strategy, which means that they have to be more eccentrically oriented, especially in key areas such as the pelvis, the upper thorax. So that incline board changes everything on up to allow them to capture eccentric orientation, which allows them depth in a squat.
Sure.
Okay. So if we look at the extreme, that would follow this same premise. So this is MR's new weightlifting shoe. So this is a Velasa, and it's very high. We've got a couple weightlifting shoes here. So I'll just hold the two heels up into the camera so you can see the difference in the two structures. So this is very, very steep. So this is going to bias somebody way into an inhale position. Lots of eccentric orientation. So especially for the people that want to squat deeper, but they probably try to squat flat-footed and they never break parallel. Like they can't reduce the concentric strategies that they're using. That might be the one. And so it'll be really interesting to see how MR does with something that steep. Whereas, and this is Christy's shoe. So Christy's a weightlifter, and she's been a weightlifter for a long time. And she's got a pretty decent flat-footed squat, but you put her in this, and then she's got this beautiful upright kind of a squat that you would want to see like at the bottom of a snatch or something like that.
Sure.
And so this heel gives her enough. But again, what we're doing is we're biasing people towards inhalation. Now think about this from a load strategy standpoint. And then when I say load in this circumstance, I'm talking about the weight of the bar. If I move you towards inhalation,
right,
to gain mobility,
right,
I have taken away some of your concentric propulsive bias that you need to get the load out of the squat.
For sure.
So there's a trade-off here. And so we always have to consider that. So people say, well, even competitive powerlifters will wear an elevated shoe. So this is a squat shoe. This is technically sort of a squat shoe. And it's got a little bit of a heel on it, right? And so again, so this gains me the mobility. So maybe I can get my white lights. I got to get my depth. That's step one. It's like if it doesn't matter how much weight you can put on the bar or put it on your back. It's like if I can't get depth, then I might need to wear this with the understanding though that I'm sacrificing pounds on the bar.
Gotcha.
Right? Because again, I'm taking away a propulsive strategy to capture mobility. So they're superimposed on top of each other, right? Because I'm on the ground, so I have to have the propulsive strategy to push myself up out of the bottom of the squat, but I also have to have enough mobility to get there. So there's a trade-off. There's always a trade-off.
Have you seen people who, they'll squat flat-footed and then you'll put an elevation under their heel? Do you see them trend towards a more compressive exhaled strategy to get up once you elevate their heel, or not really?
So they're going to have to compress somewhere. There's no question about that. But because of the heel bias, I can't. There's no strategy that will overcome that because it is positional. I am
right.
locking you. I'm physically locking you towards an inhale bias to a degree to capture something. So there's my trade-off. I'm trading mobility here, and up the chain. Right, and because I'm reducing the propulsive strategy, there's no way that you're going to demonstrate if we use strength as a gym number. So the amount of weight on the bar, I don't think you'll ever squat as much. If you could take somebody that has a legitimate flat-footed squat that can squat well, put them in a weightlifting shoe, I don't think they can approach what they would squat. And again, I don't know how much percentage, but I guarantee you that they probably won't squat as much because they can't create the compression. So intra-abdominal pressure goes down. Intrathoracic pressure goes down to achieve the position, and if I can't create the pressure, I can't lift the load. I just can't lift the load, which is why then I think that you're going to see the bias for the powerlifters. That's why they like chucks. So chucks are flat, and you're almost on the ground. This is a really thin-soled shoe, and so one of the reasons why I think that they gravitate towards this, and there's a lot of people that are just wearing chucks because their favorite powerlifters wear chucks, but the reality is why this shoe is a successful shoe for powerlifting is because it gets the medial calcaneus down as close to the ground as possible. So this is a very thin sole. It's very, very flat, so there's no elevation. So the heel to toe ratio is a straight line, which is wonderful because now I do have a maximum propulsive strategy. The problem that you run into this, though, is that because I do have a maximum propulsive strategy, I might not get my depth.
Right.
Because I can't. Again, there's this trade where, okay, there's the heel that gets me my squat depth, but this is the one that gets me my maximum poundages.
Sure.
So now I have to think about training modifications. So maybe I utilize a box squat progression that slowly allows me to eccentric orient somewhere, but I maintain my propulsive strategy.
Sure.
Or I trade it off and I say, I'm just going to elevate my heel, get my squat, and take the weight that I can.
Sure.
Which is also one of the reasons why you might see this huge difference in my ability to squat versus my ability to deadlift. So you get the guy that can deadlift 500 pounds, but his squat's only 315.
Sure.
Right? And so again, I've got a trade-off. When we think about the inhaled and exhaled strategies, or a propulsive strategy during agility. That's one of the reasons why we went with the tri-base Thrive, is because when you look at the heel, it's actually relatively flat. The heel to toe ratio is there's a minimal difference between the heel to toe ratio. So this allows me again to get my medial calcaneus into the ground, because I need that to stop and to change directions. So my propulsive strategy has to be very, very strong during agility. So again, that's why this is such a good shoe. And then I got this really rigid heel that can take the forces of the change of direction and gives me great sensation in regards to where my foot is in space. So there's no give way here. Whereas if I take this shoe, so the heel to toe ratio here is rather dramatic. So you would never want to do agility with this type of a shoe, because now I'm in an inhaled strategy. So this might as well be labeled as an ankle sprain shoe for agility. Great for straight ahead stuff, but if you look at the structure of the heel, if I allow this to tip just a millimeter outside of where I can control the rear foot,
right.
and again, there's no rear foot control on it, because I can just crush the heel. So this is just a slipper with a really thick sole on it, and it might be comfortable and it might look nice, but it's not very useful under any circumstances for anything in my book.
Sure.
Because again, I just don't have any sensation. It's not about literally controlling things, about feeling stuff so that the musculature up above can adapt. Now, when we go to something like with the New Balance, this is a traditional running shoe. So we got good bend here. It's got a fairly rigid midsole. It's not perfect yet, but again, and then my heel counter's fairly stiff. So it's not like the world's greatest version of a New Balance shoe, but it does provide me some element of structure that gives me sensation above that I can run straight ahead. But again, I still wouldn't use this for a change of direction. It's just the heel to toe ratio is too high. So you see the big thick heel in the back and then really skinny. So literally I'm tipping them up as if they're standing on the incline.
Sure.
I'm biasing them towards inhalation, which is not necessarily the best strategy. And then if I look at my test from above, so where I have somebody that might be biased towards exhalation, that might be a useful shoe for them to walk around in, because it's going to reduce their eccentric or their concentric strategy. It'll allow them to be a little bit more eccentric, so they'll capture mobility during the day and they'll feel a lot better. Whereas if I got somebody that's concentrically oriented all over the place, I put them in this shoe and they walk around and now they feel miserable. Their hips hurt, their knees hurt, their back hurts, and everything else,
right.
Because all I'm doing is reinforcing compression, 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 propulsion, propulsion, propulsion. So concentric out the wazoo. Eccentric orientation is what allows me to move. And so that's why you would select one of these shoes depending on the goal, but understanding the sacrifice. High heel, great. Eccentric orientation, depth in the squat, reduced propulsive, concentric strategies. So I'm going to reduce how much weight I can lift. I'm going to maximize the amount of weight that I can lift, but I'm going to sacrifice mobility. And then everything else kind of falls into this in-between stage, depending on what our goal is. So again, if I have somebody that's a massive exhaler and I want to walk around a little bit more comfortably, I put them in something that looks like that, right? If I don't care about somebody very much, I'm going to put them in something that, some shoe that just you can fold it up and put it in your back pocket, kind of a thing. You have to earn those shoes. You really have to have some integrity in regards to your ability to move well, breathe well. To wear a shoe like that successfully.
Gotcha.
But again, everything just kind of falls into a little bit of a category.
Gotcha.
Any questions?
Yeah, when you're treating patients, are you always going to be looking towards shoe recommendations regardless of the issue, or? No, because it depends on, and you could, but it depends on what strategy that they're using and whether they have enough variability within the system to overcome it. So Sure.
The thing that people need to recognize is, yes, feet are always an issue. It's just how much of an influence is there? Is there an adaptation that restricts the constraints to such a degree that I need something adaptive?
Gotcha.
So we use every sensory input in our body. So we use our eyes, we use our ears, we use the contact of our teeth, we use the orientation of our head, we use our vestibular system, we use our proprioception and our kinesthetic sense, always. So all of these systems are always in play,
Gotcha.
Always. The question becomes is there an adaptation within one of those systems that constricts or restricts the constraints? And then I might need to do something adaptive. So now I do need to make my shoe choice a little bit more particular. But I don't make a leap to that because I just don't know how adaptive the rest of the system is. Because if the system can adapt through any number of things, then I don't need to worry about that. But to immediately throw things at people, like to alter a sensory input just for the sake of altering a sensory input, that alone can temporarily change things. But from a long-term strategy, it may not be, because it's not the limiting factor. And so that's why you treat people over time. That's why you make decisions over time. That's why your probability then comes into play as part of your treatment process, because you just don't know. Because so I gave you a shoe, it's a different novel sensation, and that might shift you in a favorable way temporarily, but if I tested you 2 hours later under the same circumstance, now I get a different response. And that just means that, okay, I just gave you something that was novel for a little while, maybe meaningful for a second or two, but it's not the end strategy that you needed to make this this variability a little bit more extensive, and allowing you to learn and then to capture this a little bit more effectively from a long-term perspective. Because that's ultimately what you want. It's like, I'm not going to stick you in a shoe. Ultimately, I want you to wear any of these shoes and not be a problem. But we might need something to overcome that, but not necessarily right off the bat.
Awesome.
Yeah. Cool.
Thank you, Bill.
Yeah. Ask me that question again.
So you were discussing...
You're not on camera yet, man. So, hang on.
Oh boy.
You got to make sure you're on camera. So
Good.
So you can be famous.
This is my pretty face. I shaved
that was
today
that
for
was
the Nikki. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
See, it's catching on. It's catching on.
Yeah.
You were talking about the one study that they put people in different shoes, and they saw that the foot didn't change, but everything else on top changed.
Yeah. So they literally stuck bone markers in it, so they're monitoring feet. So and again, I think this is more of like a running shoe study, I think, and I want to say it's the Sherry study, but I'm not sure. I can't remember off the top of my head. But what they did is they looked at, okay, I'm going to take the same feet, I'm going to put them in 3 different styles of running shoes, and then we're just going to monitor and see what happens. Were there subtle changes? Probably subtle changes, but it was not a significant difference statistically, right? So again, that just lends some credibility to the fact that when we put you in a shoe, it's still the same foot. The foot behavior is not going to change, but we bias the ground. We change the ground position. And so I can bias you towards a global strategy. So this becomes an inhalation and exhalation kind of a game, because as I supinate you, you become more inhale biased. As I pronate you, become more exhale biased. Right. So again, we can never look at the human system in isolation like that, unless like a gunshot or a sledgehammer can certainly give us an isolated lesion of some sort. But again, we have to think it globally.
But I feel like it's a little bit of a contradiction that if you are getting these global changes, and we are just looking at the foot, which is almost like a microcosm of this whole system, wouldn't we also be seeing those biases or those changes within that foot as well?
But so think about this though. What I'm doing when I put you in something that creates a constraint, so like I put you on an incline, it's the same foot. I'm just restricting its behavior to a part of the normal excursion of that foot. Okay. So if I have full supination to full pronation, and I put you in an elevated heel, all I'm doing is exposing your supination strategy. Gotcha. I'm not allowing the pronation strategy to occur. Okay. Right? It's the same foot though. So again, this means that the behavior above the ground, which is going to be the surface of the shoe, right? So everything above the ground changes. We can't just look at this as a foot thing, right? We have to look at it as a global strategy thing, and that's why people squat better. That's why you can front squat in high heels, right? But think about this so we bring up high heels. So think about a high heel strategy for those of us, that wore the high heels in the 70s. I wore high heels in the 70s because it was cool. You had your big flared pants that covered your platform shoes. Nice. Right? So guys walked around in high heels too.
And long hair and everything.
Absolutely. Big wide lapels, long hair, bell bottoms, and high heel shoes. But again, and we tend to see more females obviously now in this era that would still be biased towards wearing an elevated heel. And so that's part of the influence of the strategy. And so again, do I want to take people out of their heels? Not all the time. So high heels are not bad all the time. they might be useful under certain circumstances.
Sure.
Right? And I had one instructor in PT school, made her own shoes, and she had almost a 2-inch elevation in her heel because she understood what her subtalar. She actually had a frame of reference for where her subtalar joint was and how it was constructed. So the number of facets on the subtalar joint determine how much mobility you have. So if I have a single facet of the subtalar joint, I have somebody that has a very mobile foot. And so maybe I do need to give them a little bit more structure that limits the full excursion of the foot, because if they stay in propulsive strategy too long, now I'm a compressor and I can't move. And so again, this can be useful. It doesn't mean I'm going to use it all the time. It doesn't mean I'm going to default to it all the time, but it can be useful. So that's what you need to consider, right? Because we're just biasing, and it's a bias. I'm not taking away everything, but if I bias you far enough, and I reduce that strategy to such a degree, like I said before, it's like I steal some of the weight that you lift, but at least you got a white light on your powerlifting meet. Right?
Gotcha.
Say it again. Say it again. If you're going to talk about this stuff, get on camera. Get on camera so everybody knows your pretty face.
But you have the high heel also creates the change in the center of gravity.
Right, but what is that? That's just a change. That's just a change in the strategy, right? So where is the center of gravity in theory?
Forward.
Well, it's in front of S2, right?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Right? Okay.
Yeah,
so if I tilt the sacrum into nutation or counter nutation, what did I do to the center of gravity?
Push it forward or backward.
Exactly. And so yes, you're absolutely correct, but it's just part of the global strategy. It's not, you don't look at you can't look at center of gravity in isolation, because I can pick out a center of gravity anywhere along the system, right? If I give you a barbell overhead in a snatch, right? And let's just say you keep the barbell centered over the foot where you should to execute the lift, the body's going to make these anterior, posterior, rotational, and all sorts of adjustments underneath the load to make sure that you're moving through the excursion of the lift, because the goal is to keep the weight overhead as you stand up out at the bottom of that deep squat, right? So you're always going to make the adjustments underneath. As long as I have that variability, and that is going to provide it. It's very rare that you see a flat-footed Olympic lift. There are guys out there that do it, but again, the advantage of having the elevated heel cannot be understated.
I think a lot of people will think of high heels as creating an anterior weight shift and then a nutation of that sacrum, which would be more of like a exhaled strategy.
So here's what that would mean. Here's what that would mean. And it's not that you can't do it. It's just really, really hard to do it. If you were on a hill with your toes lower than your heels, would you lean back into the hill to maintain your balance, or would you lean forward?
Lean back.
Exactly. So that's counter nutation of the sacrum. So that's an inhaled strategy, right? Because if I spend too much time in an exhaled strategy or leaning forward, I tumble down the hill, which again, the natural reaction is to shift backward, right? And the way I do that is by expanding myself anterior to posterior. That's why the heels elevated squatting becomes so useful for people with neck pain, so useful for people with shoulder pain, so useful for people with hip impingements, because they can squat without a hip impingement, right? Because they're not thrown forward anymore, because they're not propelling as hard as they used to, right?
But we also have people that come in here who exhibit compensatory strategies where they're pushing things backwards.
Absolutely.
But that's creating more of an exhaled strategy. So
Yeah.
if that person then walks into the door,
right,
and we ask them or we have them elevate their heels, do you think they're more likely to go further into that compensatory pattern of leaning backwards?
And that's a big maybe, but that's why we rely on our observations, our testing, and our probabilities.
Okay.
Right? That's just a step-by-step process. And again, it would be really nice if we could make a leap and say, yes, this is exactly what they need to do, but now you're trying to be a cookbook reader instead of being a chef, right? Sure. And so that's why you rely on process. So you eliminate layers of compensatory strategy, and then I get down to what your genetic bias is based on your structure. And now we can start talking about this kind of stuff.
Gotcha.
Right? But when I have those superficial strategies, you got to eliminate those first, and that might require that you're off your feet anyway.
Gotcha.
Right? I might have to be anti-gravity for a little while to teach myself to alleviate those strategies. Right? And again, I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. It's like, that's why we measure, intervene, and then remeasure. So we do understand what strategy they're using. We do understand how much of an influence there is, because I can't predict that.
Gotcha.
And that's just part of being a good therapist and treatment.
Gotcha.
Are you done asking me questions?
I think so. Shut it off. I'll probably think